that is the time to go. Ah, yeah. The Bango Man. Ah, yeah. The Bango Man. Well, the Bango knows what the little girls are saying.
Hi everybody, back at the shop after an excellent day of riding yesterday. The bike's all cooled down now. This is one of those motorcycles, if you've ever owned one, that you can just keep riding. You don't want to get off. It's so comfortable, you just want to keep going. That seat there, that bucket seat, leather upholstery, don't even have to hold on. You just turn the throttle and away you go. This bike is so easy to operate, so comfortable. It's such a pleasure. Everything works exactly like you would like it to. I love this bike. I finished this bike in 1996. It took me 15 years to build. I started in 1981 on this bike, on a shoestring budget. That's why things take so long. Bike's not for sale. This bike goes with me to the end of the line if I can help it. So, let's take a closer look at this excellent 750 Norton Roadster Custom. Custom motor. Quite sophisticated. Let's take a look at the crankshaft. This is what I've done to the crank in that bike. Quarter wall, 4130, steel tubing, reinforced crankshaft. So we have all forged aluminum rods to hook these pistons up to my chrome moly reinforced crank. Now this is an 810 Dunstall barrel. An 810 Dunstall barrel that I have resleeved down to 750. Dunstall blew it. The sleeves he used were too thin. You get head bolt torque deflection and they will distort a thin sleeve. So I have 3/32 wall, a little bit over, proper thickness for an aluminum block, sleeves in this, sleeve down to 750. And it's working very nicely. I've also put in studs instead of bolts. The studs are superior. You thread them all the way into the thread cavity. They go right to the very bottom. They encapsulate the entire thread cavity in the barrel. Then you put your head on, you put your nuts on, and torque up from the top here on these nuts. So there's less chance of head stud torque deflection on the barrel. Studs much better. Of course, you always true up your head gasket surface. Make sure it's immaculate. Don't be using ridiculous things like silicone. And a copper head gasket, of course, you should always use a copper head gasket if you want to get home. If you look at this bike after having fun there yesterday, all you see is dust. There's not one speck of oil dripping out of anywhere on this bike. Speaking of oil, here's my return lines from the back of the cylinder head, right here and right here. They're dropping all the oil from the back of the cylinder head over the lifters and the cam. The factory drains the rear cylinder head into the timing cover, wastes it, doesn't do anything with it. Just uses the exhaust oil over the lifters and cam. So this here I've been doing since 1973. This is my original concept, which I have on most of my bikes. Here it is on this little red racer here with the long rod slipper piston 4S cam. Here it is on the 750 with the single squish. Here's my return lines there. These were done about 7 years ago. I didn't do it to the Dunstall because I wanted to keep the Dunstall barrel unadulterated on that bike because it's for sale. Here's my stalker, which I did in 1987, the last time I was in on this motor. And here's the bike I originally did it on, my vintage Black Beauty here. I did this in 1973. This motor was in one of my choppers, and then I crashed that, and here we are. I 45 years ago, I did this. I own this idea. Nobody else in the Norton world has ever come close to doing this, returning all the top end oil over the lifters and cam. And if you think this doesn't work, maybe you should try no oil and see how it works. Here's the lifters out of this motor. I just took them out when I rebuilt it 5 years ago. You see that? That's 41 years. 41 years running the hell out of this thing. These are lightened. So I put in some stock lifters because I wanted to make sure it was as quiet as possible. So this idea of draining the oil from the back of the head to over the lifters and cam is Redline Norton Canada's from 1973, thank you. This oil filter here is my concept from 1985. I first put that on a customer's bike when I was working at British Motorcycles. And then in 1987, I put it on my stock bike. And then when I was building this one, this would have been done in 1993 approximately. Over here, on the Ninja 750 Norton, that was done in about 2007 approximately. Got lazy on this bike, but it has the factory one on, of course, on the return. The Dunstall has the deluxe package. Both, there's my system there, plus the factory return filter. That's high performance. Dual oil filters, one on each side, is high performance. Making things last long so they don't wear out, that's high performance. And if you're hating on me, can you imagine how many cars would be parked at the side of the road if there was no such thing as an oil filter on a car? They'd be parked everywhere. So I'm very happy with that system that I own, I created. I designed and engineered everything about this. I own this. Redline Norton Canada, David Sundquist, 1985. I've seen some people trying to imitate it with a return filter and a bracket positioned here with oil lines that are all hanging out here. The most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. Absurdly ridiculous. So, everybody in the world, if anyone can tell me how I did this, I'll give you $100 Canadian. You send me a drawing of how I plumbed this filter in this timing cover, exactly how I did it, and you'll get my respect and $100 Canadian. So, we're not finished with the oil system. This Dunstall cam is an oil-fed cam. Every lobe has a hole in it. There it is right there. There's my Dunstall thing right there. Here's one of the holes right there. There's another one right there, just ready. The cam is about to lift the valve. So you can imagine oil coming out of there, lubricating exactly where it needs it on every lift. Needle bearings here. Here's where Dunstall wanted the oil seal put originally, inside the case. Ridiculous. I extended the cam with a spigot, protrudes out, and I put the oil seal here in this chrome nut. So now if you have an oil problem, you can unthread this nut, take a look at the seal, new one, whatever's going on, figure it out. There you go. My friend run this cam in the early 70s. The Dunstall seal inside of here did not even connect with the end of the cam. It was so poorly designed. The bike burned oil like crazy. Wet something just blowing blue. Took off this line, just ran it without oil feed. And it ran very nicely. Now when I took this motor apart 7 years ago to do the chromoly rod and the chromoly crank and the long rods and slipper pistons, these lifters in here were like, I just put them in and they had 15 years on them. These, oh, A65 lifters. Gee, they're popular these days. All the kids are putting in A65 lifters. Well, Redline did that in 1993. When was that? 24 years ago. Yes, Redline, Norton, Canada installed A65 lifters in 1993. I'm probably not the first one to do that. I'm sure someone in England in the 60s probably did the same thing. I'd like to know if you can tell me. I'd appreciate that. So, look what we have here. There's the head. Here's something you only see from Redline Norton, Canada. I've never seen any modified combustion chambers on a Norton. Bathtub and combustion chambers on Harleys, everyone does that. On Nortons, no. This I did in 1993. Not my first job. No, not my first squish combustion chamber modification. This is a Cosworth style dual squish. Cosworth style dual squish. I have it on this bike here. That's what you're looking at with this head. And on the Dunstall. Has the same head. So, if you know anyone that was squishing Norton heads, let me know. Because I haven't seen one and I've been looking. So I did this first. Oh, here's a single squish. 2 of my bikes are. 3 customers' bikes. Here's a Triumph I did. And I did a Harley. Yeah, right here. This Harley is my most prestigious restoration work I ever did here at Redline. I actually built this as my mother's between 1984 and 1986. It's a perfect, immaculate restoration job, including all this fancy stuff that came with their add-ons from the 40s. This bike is so perfection. Every nut, bolt, washer, and screw is exactly what the parts manual requests. It is perfect, except for 2 screws under the horn shroud here. 2 screws. One is, they're slotted instead of Phillips. This bike was taken to a bike show in 1988 here in Vancouver with 5 other Harley bike shops and their restorations. And guess who won? Under a notorious group of people actually had this in the show. The owner, Rob, and his notorious friends, under their banner, the Norton Nerd and his Harley work, I won first place. Best hog restoration. Not bad for Norton Nerd. Moving right along. This is my first squish job. Yeah, I squished these knuckleheads. Super rare knuckleheads in perfect shape. And here's the Norton Nerd telling this notorious person that I'm going to squish his head. Yeah, I'm going to weld in some 1/4-inch steel plates. Bing, boom, bang. There we go, in my mother's backyard with my buzz box. And I'm happy to say they're beautiful. I had to put in flathead pistons and 1/8 stroker plates to accommodate the squish. Plus, grind out a little notch in the frame tube here behind this cylinder head and a little notch in the valve cover. That was a close one. That motor almost didn't fit. This bike, this is a picture from it being here 5 years ago for minor tune-up. So this bike I finished in 86. Wow, it's about, what's that, 35 years old or something? I want to use my fingers right now. So, that's when I started squishing motors. 1986, 84. And my Norton, this here, 1992, 93. And then my more recent ones about 7 years ago on the single squish and these other bikes that are for sale here. Squish is high performance. It's not necessarily horsepower so much as fuel, efficient burning of the fuel, enhancing flame propagation. Also this head, I've got the kibble white stainless valve, standard size. I don't port things out. This is a 32 millimeter head, or ports here, down to a 30 millimeter here, down to 28 millimeter carbs. These carburetors are 28 millimeters, big enough for me. I'm not racing. I'm not trying to set a new speed record. I want good gas mileage and good low end performance. I also have kibble white valve train springs in here where the spring cups and the spring collars have been changed. The cups are thinner, the collars are titanium and taller, allowing larger valve springs. Brilliant engineering from the Americans. That's what I use in all my bikes. Polished head. Polishing this head takes the same amount of time as rebuilding an entire Norton motor top to bottom. So these are Kean downdraft, flat slide, pumper carburetors. 28 millimeter. I expect these carburetors to work from idle to full throttle and perform like a carburetor you would expect it to, as opposed to the imperfect amyl concentric where 3/4 to full throttle doesn't work unless you jet it so rich that the bottom end suffers and you're running rich and 8-stroking around. And in an amyl concentric, there's not enough jet selection to do anything about it. So you're stuck with really no full throttle on an amyl concentric. So I expect these Kean 28 millimeters to do a fine job for me. Flat slide, accelerator pump, downdraft Keans. And if you want to put downdraft Keans on your Norton, all you'll be able to fit in here is 28 millimeter and no air cleaner. Because if you go bigger, they won't bolt in a downdraft position. Running a huge fuel filter here, automotive type. See these yellow marks, this yellow paint? Kean doesn't want you to take these apart. They want you to send them back to the factory. Holy moly. I just rejetted these up to about 300 equivalent main jet amyls for my next test ride. So we have one of my Ram's Head Sunstall exhaust systems here that I first did in 1974 on my stock Norton. This is not the same exhaust. I have that hanging over there. This I have on another one of my bikes. Here's a titanium muffler I was given by one of my customers. Thank you very much. I'll always appreciate your generosity. So what do we got here? Oh, we got this. This is kind of odd. I've never seen that before in the Norton world, and I've been looking for over 4 decades. This is one of my original concepts here. Single point crankshaft fired ignition. As you know, all Japanese bikes run crankshaft fired ignition. All supercars run crank fired ignition. Norton runs 2 gears, 2 sprockets, and a chain. So I thought I could improve upon that. Cut off a piece of the timing cover and weld it on, my brother did the welding, to a clutch case. Now, if you want to try this, single point. If you want to try this, centering this is tricky because you got to run the oil seal. So centering this housing to be welded, very tricky if you're going to do this. So this is working perfectly. It has for, well, since I've been running this bike, which is since 1996, 21 years ago, when I first hit the road with this bike. Here is my wiring for this bike. I have a rectifier like that, and what I run is one 12-gauge wire from the rectifier to the coil. Then it branches off to a switch to the lights, other side of the coil, points, and a kill button to stop the motor. This bike has no battery, no fuse, no capacitor, no ignition switch, no connections, one wire. Boom, boom. Part of the charm of this motorcycle. How easy this is to ride this bike. I don't carry an ignition key. I have a fork key. This bike is never parked outside for the night. This bike is not ever let out of my sight. So having it hot wired, it's just fine with me. Now, all you people that don't know about how to wire your coils and have tried and got frustrated, can you imagine one wire to spark your spark plugs on the power side of it? No connections, no battery, none of that. This works so well that this year when I was just trying to break the clutch loose to start it for the first time after storage, this thing fired up on me. I wasn't even trying to start it. So that's how I like to roll. Simple but effective. You notice this nonsense here? These black marks? What am I doing? This is plug indexing. You hear about it in the automotive hot rod world a lot, but you don't hear about it in the motorcycle world. I've seen it talked about in a 1948 AJS 500 single workshop manual. They tell you all about it in there and how to do it and why it's important. Now here is a spark plug in the exact position you want. Here's the problem. This tang here, if it's on this side, interferes with flame propagation. When it sparks, it starts the propagation here. And here we have this tang, and it's trying to spread across the cylinder here, the head here. But the tang's in the way. So when you index a plug, you want that tang there. You want it on the outside, or at least there, or at least there. There is perfect. No shrouding. When this sparks, there's no shrouding of the flame by this tang. That's plug indexing is all about, if you care. So this black mark, you see, coincides with the tang. Wherever the tang is, that black mark is. And how you index your plugs. This one's pretty good. This brand new plug, fluking it in here. That's almost correct. It just travels a little bit far. So you try your two new plugs and see if you can get them to index without changing the washer. If you can't, you have to buy some indexing washers which are thicker and thinner. And then you try them till you get the plug in this position so it's not disrupting the flame propagation. Alrighty, moving right along. Well, I think we've checked out the motor. Transmission is your basic Norton tranny with the later model, later stronger lay shaft with no oil grooves cut in it. Nice smooth 90-degree radiuses. Wow, they went to machine shop class. So that's what's in all my transmissions actually. And of course the roller bearing and this, that, and the other thing. Yeah, so that's all that's going on there. Alrighty, that's how this motor works. And the oil, and the electrical. So let's check out, let's check out this front end, shall we? Basic Norton front end, commando. Lockheed reservoir modified as usual. Alloy throttle. Harley clutch lever. Tack only. Nice little fairing. Got for free. See it mounted by those brackets there and some stabilizing brackets on the top. Rare CB headlight lens. Concave. Mint shape. Halogen light. Super bright. I love it. I own 3 of those lenses. I paid my friend $200 for this one about 7 years ago. He was selling his bike. So we have our Norton headlight mounts, Norton headlight, triple treble bellows, fork brace off of a 60s dirt bike, 1/4-inch aluminum. I'm sure glad I didn't make that. It would have taken me all day. And we got our alloy Wassel fender. And my usual bracketing here with the curved piece clamped up to the axle and the hardware underneath as usual, not on top. And we have these Suzuki wheels from a 750 1983 Suzuki. The Norton forks are wider by 1/2 inch. So you have to make up some spacers to go between the disc and the hub here. These 1/4-inch alloy spacers. Moving the discs outward, and then you change this spacer here also, 1/4-inch longer spacer on each side. And now this wheel almost fits on your Norton. You have to modify your steering yokes and this headlight bracket. So you start with the headlight bracket, you got to cut it open down here on the inside, widen it up to fit your Suzuki fork tubes, then you re-weld it. And make sure it still fits your Suzuki fork tubes. These fit in here, right? So these have to be machined out. These have to be machined out where the headlight goes in here. Headlight fits in there. And then you got to machine it out because your Suzuki fork tube is bigger than your Norton fork tube. Top yoke, same deal. You got to bang this out to fit your new size of your headlight mounts. And then here's a recess where the fork tube drops into and butts up against this 90-degree abutment here. Here's a Norton fork nut that I modified, put this threaded stem on. So your fork tube comes down. It has fork nuts inside the top of the Japanese fork tubes that you can thread to this diameter. So you put the fork tubes down, thread them up, kiss up and reef up against the abutment, good to go. How did I do this machining? I did it all here in-house with my 1/2-inch drill press. Yes, my 1/2-inch made in China drill press. Made up this tool on my lathe from British Motorcycles on Fraser, the lathe from 1946. Made up this tool, 1/2-inch drill press, and we patiently obtained results. So you can do the same. Make up one of these tools. Oh, and before you machine here, put in a pinch bolt, a spacer washer, and tighten it up before you machine here. So you do all this, make these spacers down here and the axle spacers, bang, your Suzuki stuff fits on your Norton. No problemo, eh? Ah, the back wheel, while we're talking Suzuki, is Suzuki also. Of course, you got to fit it into the more narrower Norton swing arm. And how you do that is by machining the cush drive hub. Where the sprocket kisses up to the face of the cush drive hub, you have to take down, move the sprocket towards the center. You have to move the bearing. So you machine this bearing boss and you move the bearing towards the center and the seal here. What you have to end up with is the same distance as the factory had here between the swing arm plate and the face of the sprocket. At the same time though, while you're machining your cush drive to move this sprocket, you have to center the wheel to the center of the bike, and you're not going to do it by moving these castings around. No spokes, you got to do it by this cush drive. So you're centering the wheel and moving your sprocket to where you want it by modifying the cush drive. Over on this side, it's a lot easier. No spacer required. This relationship, of course, stays the same here, so you don't do anything here. You leave this spacer alone. If you need to change something, it will be the caliper mount you're going to change. I appear to have added a washer in here. It's been over 2 decades since I did this, so I've kind of forgotten. So that is the wheels. Now the suspension here is a Vincent style swing arm that I made from a Commando one. This is a rear frame hoop off of a Norton frame that I welded on. Then you have your front down tubes here connecting to the swing arm, welding on. Here I put a piece of aluminum acting like a fender, and here's a little rubber connector so you don't have stuff flying all on your bike. So right here is a grease fitting because there are needle bearings in the end of this shock here. The needle bearings can stand up to the pressure. If that was rubbers, they'd be all destroyed by now. This swing arm is 10.5 inches from the shock pivot to the swing arm pivot. Factory was about 20 inches from the shock mount to the swing arm pivot. So this is almost twice as much mechanical advantage. A very sensitive swing arm, very sensitive rear suspension with a hell of a lot of travel, almost like a dirt bike. This has got a significant amount of negative travel, and this rides like a caddy. If this takes up bumps, you can go all day, you don't feel anything. It's excellent. There is a problem though with this mechanical advantage on this swing arm. It torques out the isoelastics. The isoelastics get stressed. They get pulled back. Everything gets pulled back. The motor, the tranny, the whole isoelastic cage, every time you go over a bump, it's pulling back on the isoelastic rubbers. So what I had to do, here's another cross member I put in here. And you see these 2 rubber bumpers here. These are exhaust grommets facing rearward and forward. So here's the cross member. Here's some tangs I welded onto the cage. And these 2 rubbers here prevent the cage from moving backwards. I also have 2 on the top here. In my top motor mount, 2 facing forward, rearward, and the usual 2 facing sideways. So that's kind of a downer about my triangulated swing arm. Mechanical advantage really stresses out the isoelastics. So if you're going to do this trick swing arm, you have to do those rearward and forward facing grommets, or you're going to torque out your isoelastics. Let's take the tank off this thing, shall we? I've already loosened it off. I have to drain the gas, prepare this for storage. So let's slip the tank off and see what's happening under there. Drain the gas, lube the taps. All right, this oil tank in the frame, it's the first one I did. Basically the same as the other two bikes. This one has got the same frame, and this one has got the same oil tank in the frame. So how you do this, you cut the big tube right along there. You cut off the small tube that Norton has, take it all out, make up this U-channel, sheet metal, 18 gauge, weld it back in. Put your tank mounts back on. You see this cross member I'm doing here. Good shot of it as it attaches to the bottom of the oil tank there. There we go. Attaches to this cross member here. So this frame actually, this extending, this neck is what I'm trying to do here. This neck now actually starts there with this cross member and this cross member. Nortons are the weakest frame ever built on a motorcycle out of England, other than a moped. They are pathetic. I know, I've straightened many. 7 out of 10 Nortons are tweaked when you ride them. The front end, the neck is tweaked and you can feel it. So, this is quite a bit more substantial than the factory had to offer as far as neck integrity. Here's that top motor mount. 2 grommets facing forward to rear, and the usual side to side grommets there. Harley coil. Here's my breather system. This pipe breathes up here, circles around, then drops down. You can see it right there to the chain. Not one drip has come out of that since I installed it. No oil travels further than here. This huge breather hose, I had to install this because I had a problem with the oil tank displacing oil. So I had to move the breather hose to the outside atmosphere, not to the oil tank. And this hose, 3 baffles in here and lowering the oil level down to the center of the crank. This is what I've done to all 3 of my oil tank in the frame Nortons. They work perfectly, absolutely perfect. This hole here is the breather hose from the oil tank breather. When the oil tank has the correct amount of oil, a little bit of oil pees out of here. If you don't see any oil peeing out of there, you can add some to the oil tank. That little bit of oil keeps this tube nice and clean. That's your basic oil tank in the frame, same as the other 2 bikes. And this one is working well. Usually the cap will leak, these imperfect caps, but you can see by the drool here, or the decal, that we haven't had any major disasters taking place. The rear tank mount, 1/8 stainless. Over here, we're looking for drips off, hanging off the coil. Any drips of oil? No, that's the way we like it. No drips of oil hanging off anywhere, thank you. So, the frame gets cut off here. This is factory, this frame tube. These are some of my tubes I put in and how it travels all the way around here. This is my framework here. And now we can talk about the tailpiece. Sure, why not? This tailpiece is made out of 18 gauge satin finish steel. Everywhere that you see black, this cross member included, is 18 gauge satin finish steel. 22 gauge aluminum there, pop riveted on. Here's a little stabilizing bracket, don't forget it. So this is gas welded together all the way along here, across here, down the other side. There is some reinforcing on the inside where it attaches here to the frame tube, some reinforcing on the inside. Other than that, this is a very strong piece of metal work. I don't sit on it, no one sits on it. If you wanted to build a double seat, I would advise extending the frame out further and putting the seat on the frame. If you had to reinforce this, it would become a very heavy, heavy tailpiece if you were putting a seat right on, and the frame would still be a better choice. So you can make one of these. This is pretty easy. First thing you got to do, your shocks, take a spring off your shocks, have your wheel that you're going to use and tire that you're going to use mounted. Compress your shock all the way, put a block under your tire, lift the wheel up all the way as high as it'll go. That'll give you the curvature that you're looking for, where you're going to start from, the distances. So, let's say this wheel is already up. Here's your curvature for the bottom of your tailpiece, the basic. And right here, you don't want this connecting with that. So, with the wheel fully up, the shock fully compressed, you will add on at least 1 inch clearance to whatever measurement you make. You add on at least 1 inch clearance all the way here, or that tailpiece and this wheel are going to smash into each other. And as you can see by mine here, we haven't had that problem. So, use cardboard and make your templates out of cardboard to the shape you want. But first you have to have your frame built. Then you can use cardboard, make up any shape tailpiece you want, cut it out. If you make a mistake, you can do it again, tape it together, get it exactly right, then cut it out of metal. How I rolled this up was by hand over a piece of 5-inch pipe. Simple, it's only 18 gauge. So you roll this up by hand, get the exact shape you want. You got all your pieces. I had to make up this chrome piece here, and once again this is gas welded here, and if you want that big rounded corner, you got to penetrate maximum penetration to clean it up that way. So there you go, some cardboard, can't go wrong. Just make sure you get more than enough clearance here or all your work will be damaged. So what more do we have to say here? Nothing, I hope. Taken up enough of your time, so now I'm going to drain the tank, lube the tap, and we're going to store this bike for another year, or 6 months at least.